Welcome back to another lovely morning and to another episode of Justification. I want to thank again Preach the Word Network for allowing me to do just that, to give these words in a certain way where their sound forms a word to impress and imprint something new on the listener. And every time I do review them myself, something new has dawned upon me still, and I believe forever. I will continue to study these things and to make sense of them just for the purpose of being a better human and devotional being. The importance of what we have been studying, we've really dived deep philosophically the past couple of meetings together. But the point of that is to introduce a concept within the Bible and then to expound upon it in a real way. And everything that we are learning, though philosophical, the reality is for life, the reality is for breath, to our mind and to our heart, and the reality is for a shared empathy. A shared empathy, no matter what profession we have, no matter what we do, what we are, mother, father, wife, husband, teacher, educator, coach, counselor. It doesn't matter. The Bible is giving us foundational principles on how to better interact with one another from first learning how to interact with ourselves. And this is, it goes back to the illustration of the living God's chief apostle crucified. What that body means, and we are slowly picking this apart. What that body crucified means, what it now is supposed to mean for us, and what it actually does not mean. The first apostles taught a philosophy that was very, very different from what we today know. What we today know is a centralized figure being the all in all for all in all. And that's fact mixed with fiction, in a sense, because it's not a lie and it's not the entire truth. Looking at how the apostles first taught what that crucifixion represented, as that body representing something not to be looked at as a literal body, but as a body of knowledge, and the crucifixion of that body of knowledge leading to a new way of approaching the living God for the benefit of his name, for the benefit of his throne, for the benefit of the current dispensation of what his words are to portray. And so once you get past the philosophical aspect of it, then you can get in, and we will get into the point. And turning to the book of Isaiah 57, and this is the point. Of course, said as it is, we will expound upon it, but the point, Isaiah 57 and verse 15. Isaiah 57 and verse 15. For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit. To what? To revive the spirit of the humble, and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. Our last meeting together, we learned something interesting about the Bible's philosophy, that it is set to engage the conversation's heart and mind, to engage the conversation's thoughts and feelings, to engage the conversation's conscience on how it carries itself to the living God and to the living God's character and to the words representing that character. It is our conversation, the heart of our conversation and the spirit or mind of our conversation that is to be revived. And this is what the illustration of that crucifixion is to symbolize. A death and then a revival. A death and then a revival. There is no individual today dying and reviving. There is nothing like that happening physically. And so the platform or the paradigm or the plane needs to change to what is mental or inward. It is revival of the heart. It is revival of the spirit of the mind. And when we do read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the illustrations that are given to dictate how we today should view the phenomena of the dispensation of the living God in modern times. Example, the book of Luke chapter 7, verses 12 to 15. In the book of Luke chapter 7, 12 to 15. Book of Luke chapter 7, verses 12 to 15 read, "Now, when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, Weep not. And he came and touched the bier. And they that bare him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And he delivered him to his mother." Now, this story is supposed to be relevant today. Is there an individual walking around called Jesus, bringing people back to life from the dead, literally today? How can we actually know the validity of this today? Is it enough to continually believe on a story for the credibility of our faith and the extent to which it will bend or neither break for its confidence in the living God? Now, I can tell you that from the messages and conversations that I have, these stories in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they are no longer doing what they should be doing for individuals. Why? Well, the answer is context. In today's day and age, a lot is backed by science and by proof. Each year, science has more proof, and each more that proof has more proof, and each more inventions and innovations are developed because of the proof of previous proofs. But when it comes to what we know within the Bible, when it comes to what we should be believing on as credible, the time, according to the individuals that I'm speaking with, and it's consistent, the time to know more is now. The time to dig in to this more is now, because there is no one that we can look to called Jesus that we can have actual faith in physically. It either is stemming from some sort of belief within or from something attached to something else without our belief. It's not enough anymore. And according to the Bible, from our first meeting up until this point, the Bible itself knows that it is not enough. That's the beautiful, brilliant part of it. The Bible knows that it is not enough. Now, if John 4:24 is correct, that God is a spirit, we ought to look at this a little bit more in depth. Because although a story of a revival, this is not happening yesterday. This is not happening to us in our generation. Generations don't know this to be fact. The only way that we can know this to be fact is if we experiment with the illustration. The illustration is about revival. And depending on a certain thing for revival will allow what is to be revived. And we reviewed a verse, Isaiah 42:16. Isaiah 42 and verse 16. "And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them and crooked things straight." It is about revival. Now, if there is no physical or literal revival happening by an individual called Jesus, and if John 4:24 is correct, and we're going to take it as correct that God is a spirit, how is this to occur? Is it to occur physically or inwardly? Is it to occur within the spirit or the mind or within something physical at this point in time while you are alive? Because while you are alive, you are supposed to experience these words. No longer relying on them as a story, but as fact. And this fact is what the first apostles taught. The fact of your revival occurring within while you are alive and while your heart is beating. We reviewed this previously, but again, Ephesians 4:22 and 23. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 and 23. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 and 23. That you put off the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. This was the central argument for the first apostles when it came to explaining the illustration of the living God's chief apostle crucified. They took a literal image and they put it in its correct context. The context is the illustration of a conversation crucified. We haven't hit the point yet, but then this crucified conversation transitions into a conversation revived. This is what the story in the book of Luke is getting us to understand. Whatever Jesus is, it is to revive. And that's the context that these authors have to remember. We have to remember that the authors writing this are really careful and they understand, according to their Greek polytheistic religion and also their Jewish religion, what they are driving home by the rumors that they have heard of an individual and by the collective history recorded of an individual through many, many manuscripts. So they know what they're doing when they're writing in this way. They understand. The authors are something that we have to pay attention to when reviewing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because these authors are not our authors. These authors are writing from a literacy perspective or a perspective in literature that diverges or that is not really what we know to be literature. So reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you really have to dig into its language and its context. Because although the image is giving what it gives, the context of what it is giving is in a full perspective of the philosophy at hand. A philosophy that has been built up for generations previous to this individual's point in time on earth. Philosophy on revival. And so hearing of an individual, raising another individual to life from being dead, we have to understand the perspective that these authors are writing in, which is two. Now we can take what they're writing as being literal, or we can take what they're writing as symbolizing something deeper and infinitely and intricately more perfect. Now the first apostles did not take so much of a literal stance on it, but a figurative. And figuratively, they understood the real or the literal, which is the putting away of the former conversation, the putting away of that life that we hold dear, called our faith, to the living God, according to a standard we've reviewed plenty of times that is no longer applicable to approach the living God with. Now what is demanded is the putting away of those former devotional or religious habits and embracing a new form of thought, embracing a new stream of living, embracing a special way of acknowledging your relationship to the living God by reviving the spirit of your mind. As Paul says, renewing the spirit of your mind. It is this renewing that we have been speaking about from our very first meeting. This renewing through action, through experience, through handling. And there was another illustration in the book of John, John chapter 9. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. We won't read the entire section. We will read a portion and then fast forward. But John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. John chapter 9, 1 through 7. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. Fast forwarding to verse 6. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of his spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with clay, and said unto him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. Now again, there is no individual literally doing this today. There is no one literally having their blindness healed by believing on Jesus or anything like that today. Nothing like that's taking place. Again, it's about context. We have to make this context right for where we are today, and in a reasonable, fashionable sense. Now, if we flip to the book of Ephesians chapter 1, verses 17 to 19. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 17 to 19. Just thinking about the eyes, for example, that the eyes of this individual were healed. Put this in the right context. In the book of Ephesians chapter 1, 17 through 19. That the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give unto you the spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him, the eyes of your understanding being enlightened, that you may know what is the hope of his calling, and what the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints, and what is the exceeding greatness of his power to usward who believe, according to the working of his mighty power. And this is Paul's giving it to us. Paul is giving it to us. It is the eyes. When we read this story and we're hearing about an individual whose eyes have been healed, that's all fine and well to take this as what it is. But there is a real meaning to what is being written and to what we are to interpret from what is said. Now, this story, although about literal eyes, is to be taken in a context higher than a story of lore. Again, the authors wrote this specifically tailored for individuals to dig into it and to make life of it. While the eyes of this individual were healed, it is better, or it is well, to think of the understanding of this individual healed. The eyes of the understanding. Our understanding, the understanding of our conversation, of our devotional or spiritual conversation to whatever faith or belief we have, is to go through a death, and it is to go through a revival. It is to go through a passing away, and it is to go through a resurrection. By handling the experience within these words, within the Bible, by handling that experience, we are putting our faith, we are putting our experience into the hands of these words, which means that we are putting them into the hands of the living God. Now, we can know that by exercising the faith that it takes. But so long as we remain content within the order that we have. Remember, or last meeting, he that ordereth his conversation aright shall see the salvation of God, it says in the book of Psalms. We have to order our conversation. We have to make sense of it so that it can help us make sense of us in a right way. And so the sentiments of what Paul is saying, they are echoed in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, 22 and 23, that you put off the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. This is the illustration brought to life. If you turn with me to the book of Galatians chapter 3, we've reviewed this, going back to it. Galatians chapter 3. Galatians chapter 3, to the heart of the controversy. Verse 11 and 12 and 13 and 14. Galatians 3 and verse 11, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith. And the law is not of faith, but the man that doeth them shall live in them. It says, verse 13, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is every one that hangs on a tree. That the blessing of Abraham, verse 14, might come on the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Vague language, very, very vague language, and Paul is speaking yet clear. The issue at hand is a redemption from the philosophy of the religious law. Our belief in this individual's crucifixion means our consent to put off everything that this crucified body represents. What this crucified body now represents, it represents what is erroneous and what is, quote, sin, end quote. What is sin? This crucified body represents what sin is. To see this body representing the philosophy of the religious law, which means righteousness, goodness, and everything dandy to the eye of the divine, by executing deeds and principles, believing in principles, theories, fulfilling rites, baptism, so on and so forth, as we currently know. This is crucified. This is no longer a valid means to approach the living God's devotional character, and it is especially an invalid mean to approach how we allow our conversation to be. If we hold the living God's chief apostle as anything to us, we should be taking this individual's body, his physical body, as what it is representing. And if what it is representing is what we hold, according to what the apostles are saying, to be the foundation of our faith, then we should slowly, patiently, and temperately be removing from the old or former character that kept us at a dead-end experience and moving forward into a more real experience with the words of the living God. Hence, with our own self. Loving who we are according to the words that are within the Bible is the point of this experience. Loving who we are as human beings and loving who we are especially as devotional creatures or as spiritual beings and in relation to our Creator is the reason why this is so relevant. What we believe takes hold on our heart. And we have so many beliefs and we put our faith in so many things and people that we do not know what our heart is. We do not know where our faith stands. We do not know the original, genuine seed of faith that led us to the Bible due to the distractions that we have for our faith. Well, the Bible's telling us to give our faith more credit than we do. The Bible's telling us to give our faith the experience that it is due. The Bible wants us to know, is letting us know that our experience needs to experience its own self. It needs to experience its own self because so much of our life depends on our faith. Whether it be faith in whatever or faith in what, faith in ourselves, faith in whatever we believe is whatever, so much depends on faith. And if we do not have that exercised faith, then we really are nothing. And so the experience is uncomfortable. And the experience is supposed to be uncomfortable. And it's really no surprise because the Bible allows us to know that the experience is supposed to be uncomfortable. On more than one occasion, you can find verses similar to the ones in the book of Psalm chapter 12. Psalm chapter 12, we've been talking about how the words of the Bible can and are to be our guiding force, our correction, our conversation's correction, to also aid in the health and the revival of our human being. And so the reviving part of what these words are, the book of Psalms, the Psalms chapter 12, verse 6 and 7. Psalm chapter 12, verse 6 and 7, the words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. If the words of the Bible are written of as going through a refining process, if we too are to handle these words, and in a real way, personally and individually, they are supposed to make our life and our experience with them the same. If the living God's words are so tried that when we get them, they're at their finest, being that refined, we being refined by them are also to be thrown into a furnace. And we are to experience the burning up of past thoughts, the burning up of past feelings, the burning up of past commitments, the burning up of past habits, the burning up of past ideas. And it's not supposed to feel good, and it's not supposed to feel decent. This is what birth is. If we could actually know how birth feels, the generation of life, if we could actually know what it felt to be an organism and to go through an organism developing into a fetus, and then to understand the feeling of what it is to actually go through birth, I don't think we would even want to experience or know what life is. Or mothers feel that pain. Or mothers have that memory, but we don't. Well, now being alive and with our heart beating, when we're going through this transition the Bible is taking us through, we are going through the pains of birth. And it's going to be awful. But it's right for faith.